So I'm going to read Majjhima Nikaya number 44, the shorter series of questions and answers. It takes place at the Bamboo Grove, the squirrel sanctuary, between Visakha, and who is a non-returner at this point, and Dhammadina, which is an enlightened nun. She's a full arahant. And I'll be flipping back and forth because some of the footnotes are quite pertinent. So, lady, identity is said. What is called identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, these 5 aggregates affected by clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. That is, the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception aggregate affected by clinging, the formations aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. These 5 aggregates affected by clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. This is our first footnote. So, Pancha Upakanda as the 5 aggregates that become the conditioned for clinging. Since these 5 aggregates are in brief the entire noble truth of suffering. Majjhima Nikaya number 9 and number 28. You can read more about it there. It will be seen that the first 4 questions pose an inquiry into the 4 noble truths expressed in terms of personal identity rather than suffering. So this is the whole point of why I'm reading the sutta, I think, is that expressing the 4 noble truths in terms of identity view. So back to the sutta, saying, good lady, the lay follower Visakha delighted and rejoiced in the bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words. Then he asked her a further question. Lady, origin of identity is said. What is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is craving, which brings renewal of being, is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, and craving for non-being. This is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One. Lady, cessation of identity is said. What is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is the remainderless fading away in cessation, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. It is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One. Lady, the way leading to the cessation of identity, is said. What is called the way leading to the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is just this noble eightfold path. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Lady, is that clinging the same as the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, or is the clinging something apart from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? Friend Visakha, this clinging is neither the same as the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, nor is clinging something apart from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. It is the desire and lust regard to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. That is the clinging there. And we have another footnote, number 461. Because clinging is only part of the aggregate of formations, as defined here, greed, it is not the same as the 5 aggregates, and because clinging cannot be altogether discounted from the 5 aggregates, there is no clinging apart from the aggregates. Back to the sutta. Starts a section on identity view. Lady, how does identity view come to be? Here, friend Visakha, an untaught, ordinary person who has no regard for the noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, regards mere material form as self, or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self, or self as in material form. He regards feeling as self, or self as possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self, or self as in feeling. He regards perception as self, or self as perception, possessed of perception, or perception as in self, or perception as in perception, or self as in perception, excuse me. He regards formations as self, or self as possessed of formations, or formations as in self, or self as in formations. He regards consciousness as self, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. This is how identity view becomes to be. Lady, how does identity view not come to be? Your friend Visakha, a well-taught noble disciple who has regard for the noble ones and is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, who has regard for true men and is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, does not regard material form as self, or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self, or self as in material form. He does not regard feeling as self, or self as possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self, or self as in feeling. He does not regard perception as self, or self as possessed of perception, or perception as in self, or self as in perception. He does not regard formations as self, or self as possessed of formations, or formations as in self, or self as in formations. He does not regard consciousness as self, or self possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. This is how identity view does not come to be. Lady, what is the Noble Eightfold Path? Friend Visakha, it is just this Noble Eightfold Path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Lady, is the Noble Eightfold Path conditioned or unconditioned? Friend Visakha, the Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. Lady, are these three aggregates included in the Noble Eightfold Path, or is the Noble Eightfold Path included in these three aggregates? And here we come to another footnote. The word khandha here is different in meaning than in the more common context of the five aggregates affected by clinging. It refers to a body of training principles, the three divisions of the Noble Eightfold Path, into sila, virtue, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panya. Back to the sutta, these three aggregates are not included in the Noble Eightfold Path, friend Visakha, but the Noble Eightfold Path is included by these three aggregates: right speech, right action, right livelihood. These states are included in the aggregate of virtue. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These states are included in the aggregate of concentration. Right view and right intention, these states are included in the aggregate of wisdom. Lady, what is concentration? What is the basis of concentration? What is the equipment of concentration? What is the development of concentration? Unification of mind, friend Visakha, is concentration. The four foundations of mindfulness are the basis of concentration. The four right kinds of striving are the equipment of concentration. The repetition, development, and cultivation of these states is the development of concentration therein. Come to another footnote. The four foundations of mindfulness are the basis of concentration in the sense of being its condition. Here it would seem incorrect to translate nimitta as sign, as in the sense of either a distinctive mark or object. The four right kinds of striving are explained in Majjhima Nikaya number 77. Back to the sutta. Formations. Lady, how many formations are there? There are these three formations, friend Visakha. It is, friend Visakha, the bodily formation, the verbal formation, the mental formation. But lady, what is the bodily formation? What is the verbal formation? What is the mental formation? In-breathing and out-breathing, friend Visakha, is the bodily formation. Applied thought and sustained thought are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are the mental formation. And another footnote. Dhammadina anticipated Visakha's intention to ask about the formations that cease when one enters the attainment of cessation. Thus she explained that the three formations in this way rather than as wholesome and unwholesome volitions of body, speech, and mind. The meaning relevant within the context of dependent origination. But lady, why are the in and out breathings Why are the in and out breathing the bodily formation? Why are applied in thought and sustained thought the verbal formation? And why are perception and feeling the mental formation? Friend Visakha, in breathing and out breathing are bodily. These are states bound up with the body. That is why in breathing and out breathing are the bodily formation. First, one applies thought and sustains thought and subsequently breaks out into speech. That is why applied thought and sustained thought are verbal formations. Perception and feeling are mental. These are states bound up with the mind. That is why perception and feeling are the mental formations. Another footnote explains further that the bodily formations and the mental formations are said to be formations bound up with the body and the mind in the sense that they are formed by the body and by the mind, while the verbal formation is a formation in the sense that it forms speech. Lady, back to the sutta. Lady, how does the attainment of cessation and perception Lady, how does the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling come to be? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, I shall attain the cessation of perception and feeling, or I am attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, or I have attained the cessation of perception and feeling, but rather his mind has previously been developed in such a way that it leads to that state. Another footnote, cessation can be attained only by a non-returner or an arahant with mastery over the 8 jhanic attainments. The meditator enters each attainment in turn, emerges from it, and completes it with insight as impermanent, suffering, and not self. After completing this procedure through the basis of nothingness, he attends to a certain preliminary duties and then determines to be without mind of a particular length of time. He then briefly enters the basis of neither perception nor non-perception, after which his mind and material functions utterly cease. Thus, his determination, backed by his previous accomplishments and preparations, leads him to the attainment of cessation. Back to the sutta. Lady, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, which states first cease in him, the bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, first the verbal formation ceases, then the bodily formation ceases, and then the mental formation ceases. Lady, how does emergence from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling come to be? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, I shall emerge from the attainment of cessation and perception of feeling, or I am emerging from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, or I have emerged from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling. But rather, his mind has been previously developed in such a way that it leads him to that state. Lady, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, which states arise in him first, the bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, first the mental formation arises, then the bodily formation arises, then the verbal formation arises. Another footnote, when one emerges from the cessation, the consciousness of fruition attainment arises first, and the perception of feeling associated with that are the mental formations that arise first. Then, with the subsequent descent into the life continuum, the bodily formation, breathing, recommences, and subsequently, when the meditator resumes his ordinary activity, the verbal formation arises. Back to the sutta. Lady, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, how many kinds of contact touch him? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, 3 kinds of contact touch him: voidness contact, singleness contact, and desireless contact. Lady, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, to what does his mind incline? To what does it lean? To what does it tend? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, his mind inclines to seclusion, leans to seclusion, tends to seclusion. Another footnote. Nibbana, the object of fruition consciousness that arises on emerging from cessation, is called seclusion, viveka, because it is secluded from all conditioned things. Lady, how many kinds of feeling are there? Friend Visakha, there are 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither pleasant nor painful feeling. But lady, what is pleasant feeling? What is painful feeling? What is neither pleasant nor painful feeling? Friend Visakha, whatever is felt by the bodily or mentally as pleasant and soothing is pleasant feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as painful and hurting is painful feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as neither soothing nor hurting is neither painful nor pleasant feelings. Lady, what is the pleasant and what is the painful in regard to pleasant feelings? What is the painful and what is the pleasant in regard to painful feelings? What is pleasant and what is painful in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feelings? Friend Visakha, pleasant feeling is pleasant when it persists and painful when it changes. Painful feeling is painful when it persists and pleasant when it changes. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling is pleasant when there is knowledge of it, and painful when there is no knowledge of it. Underlying tendencies. Lady, what underlying tendencies underlines pleasant feeling? What underlying tendencies underlines painful feeling? What underlying tendencies underlies neither painful nor pleasant feelings? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust underlines pleasant feelings. The underlying tendency to aversion underlies painful feelings. The underlying tendency to ignorance underlies neither painful nor pleasant feelings. I have another footnote. The 3 defilements are called anusaya, underlying tendencies, in the sense that they have not been abandoned in the mental continuum to which they belong, and because they are capable of arising when a suitable cause presents itself. Back to the sutta. Lady, does the underlying tendency to lust underline all pleasant feelings? Does the underlying tendency to aversion underlie all painful feelings? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feelings? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie all pleasant feelings. The underlying tendency to aversion does not underlie all painful feelings. The underlying tendency to ignorance does not underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, what should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignorance should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, does the underlying tendency to lust have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feelings? Does the underlying tendency to aversion have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feelings? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feelings? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust does not have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feelings. The underlying tendency to aversion does not have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feelings. The underlying tendency to ignorance does not have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feelings. Here, friend Visakha, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. With that, he abandons lust, and the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie that. Another footnote. The bhikkhu suppresses his tendency to lust and attains the first jhana. Having made the tendency to lust well suppressed by the jhana, he develops insight and eradicates the tendency to lust by the path of non-returner. But because it has been suppressed by the jhana, it is said that the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie that. Back to the sutta. Here, a bhikkhu considers thus: when shall I enter upon and abide in that base? Here, a bhikkhu considers thus: when shall I enter upon and abide in that base that the noble ones now enter upon and abide in? In one who thus generates a longing for the supreme liberation, grief arises with that longing as condition. With that, he abandons aversion, and the underlying tendency to aversion does not underline that. Another footnote. That base, as well as the supreme liberation with arahantship, the grief that arises because of that longing is elsewhere called the grief based on renunciation. Majjhima Nikaya 137. It's explained that does not actually abandon the tendency to aversion by means of that grief, rather spurred on by the longing for supreme liberation. One takes up the practice with firm determination and eradicates the tendency to aversion by attaining the path of non-returner. Here, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, the bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, with the purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. With that, he abandons ignorance, and the underlying tendency to ignorance does not underlie that. One more footnote. The bhikkhu suppresses the tendency to ignorance with the fourth jhana, makes it well suppressed, and then eradicates the tendency to ignorance by attaining the path of arahantship. Lady, what is the counterpart of pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, painful feeling is the counterpart to painful feeling. What is the counterpart to painful feeling? Pleasant feeling is the counterpart to painful feeling. What is the counterpart to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Ignorance is the counterpart to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. What is the counterpart of ignorance? True knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. What is the counterpart of true knowledge? Deliverance is the counterpart of true knowledge. What is the counterpart of deliverance? Nibbana is the counterpart of deliverance. Lady, what is the counterpart of Nibbana? Friend Visakha, you have pushed this line of questioning too far. You were not able to grasp the limits of questions. For the holy life, friend Visakha is grounded upon Nibbana, culminates in Nibbana, ends in Nibbana. If you wish, friend Visakha, go to the Blessed One and ask him about this, the meaning of this. As the Blessed One explains it to you, you should remember it. Then the lay follower Visakha, having delighted and rejoiced in the bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words, rose from his seat, and paying homage to her, keeping her on her right, he went to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, he sat down on one side and told the Blessed One his entire conversation with the bhikkhuni Dhammadina. When he finished speaking, the Blessed One told him, "The bhikkhuni Dhammadina is wise, Visakha. The bhikkhuni Dhammadina has great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that the bhikkhuni Dhammadina has explained it. Such is the meaning, and you should remember it. That it was said, that it what the Blessed One had said, the lay follower Visakha was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One words."
Thank you for the reading. Am I understanding correctly that cessation of perception and feeling is only experienced by a non-returner? And is that like a requirement for becoming a non-returner?
No, not necessarily. The requirement for non-return is the complete relinquishing of greed and aversion. So that's
5 fetters.
Yeah, the first of the 5 fetters. So that Sakaya Ditti, Vicikicca, Silabbata Paramasa, that's the fetters that are relinquished by a stream enterer. then and greed, desire, and aversion are attenuated by the Sakadagami, and then the Anagami completely relinquishes the roots of desire or of greed and aversion and ill will.
Thank you.
The cessation of perception and feeling tends to be it's a refined state of consciousness dependent on samadhi, and a non-returner tends to have solid samadhi. So that is a basis for it. It's not a particular requirement.
Thank you, Lumpal. I had a question about the section in the sutta regarding feelings. Ajahn Karunadhammo read it a while back, and I like the part about essentially neutral feeling is pleasant when there's knowledge of it. And the sutta begins by describing the Four Noble Truths in terms of identity view, but I was wondering if you could speak on the relationship between the Four Noble Truths and Vedana, because it reminds me of the way Ajahn Dun talks about the Four Noble Truths, in the sense that he'll say that sending the mind out is the cause of dukkha. And I just thought that might be an interesting relationship between knowledge of neutral feeling being pleasant and then sending the mind out being dukkha. I was just wondering the relationship between Vedana and the Four Noble Truths.
Haven't really thought about those two in terms of relationships to each other. So this is kind of a thought in process. The aggregate of feeling is something that's present in any moment of perception, experience, and if we're moved by that feeling of, say, pleasant or unpleasant, if the mind is taken out of its base of just pure awareness, then it will move out to that object in some way or another, like going towards a pleasant feeling, wanting to get it, or get the object that produces it, or wanting to avoid an unpleasant feeling by turning away from the object. So the mind at that point is moved into action, sankhara, generating some sort of movement of the mind, as Ajahn Dun might say, the mind leaving its base, moving out, the mind being sent out, is the cause of suffering. And so if one has developed one's practice and awareness of those underlying states, tendencies to move towards or move away from pleasant and unpleasant feeling, if one has recognized that to the point where one doesn't react in the same way by moving towards or away from, then the mind stays still, and its base doesn't go out to the object, and that mind seeing the mind and not moving from its base is the path, in Ajahn Dun's recension, is the path leading to the cessation of suffering, and the result of that is the cessation of suffering. So I don't know if that addresses what you were asking directly or not.